This is a C# console application that demonstrates code which uses arrays after getting input from users. So very simple in this case. The user is going to enter a value between 1 and 20. And if the value is between 1 and 10, it's going to manually populate an array and display the elements within the array, and it will display a specific element within the array based on the integer value that the user entered. If the user enters a value between 11 and 20, then the code automatically populates an array with the values that are generated based upon which integer the user input into the program. So let's just do a quick demonstration of how this works. We're going to run this in debug mode. I'm going to enter the number 5. And so it manually populated an array. And since the user entered the number 5, here are the values in the manually populated array: 1800555, 1212. And the value is number 5 in the 5th element of the array. So if we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, so that's the 5th element. So element subscript 4 is the 5th element. We can see that the value is 5. So if we did, let's try that again. If we enter the value greater than 10, so we did 13, then what happens is the program will auto-generate an array with 13 elements. So that is 0 through 12. So let's step through this program and take a look at what it does. Again, at the top of the program, just declaring the author, date, and a general description of what the program does. And we're using a console, the system objects available in the .NET framework, and a console program is written. We have our main method here, and here we're just getting what did the user, we need to prompt the user to enter a value, an integer value between 1 and 20. And then we just enter into our try-catch block. Remember, try, good practice, to try the value that the program is using from the user input. And basically for error trap, if that doesn't work out, we have our catch block way down here. And again, as always, I tend to comment where the end of these blocks of code are so that I understand the scope and don't lose track of curly braces. We also indent appropriately to easily read our code and keep track of scope. Okay, so in the try block here, we get the input the user has entered in the console as a string, and we quickly parse that into an integer value. And then we can begin our test. So we test to see if the user has entered a value that's between 1 and 10. We then execute a block of code here. So here's where we instantiate an array here. So we're going to declare an array, and we're just going to populate manually those values inside the array here from element subscript 0. So we describe elements within an array, the position of those elements, by a subscript number. So the very first element within a single dimensional, so this is a single dimensional array, the very first subscript is 0. And so this would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So we've got some elements here within our array. And then all we're doing then is based on what the user, an integer value that the user has entered, we're just going to display the specific value the user has entered. We're also going to display the value in the position of the array based on that integer value. So if we were trying to display the array with value 3, right here, number and element 3, it would be 0, 1, 2, 3. That would be 0 right there. And so that's really what we're doing here. And so as we come down, once we populate our array, we can iterate through the values of the array using a loop. Now, in prior examples, we showed the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop. There's also a for each loop. It's a much simpler loop to write. It's really all we're doing here is just initializing a variable I, and what we're going to do is just loop through the array numbers right here. So easy. And we're just going to write out the value as it goes through each element within the array numbers. That's all we're doing here. Pretty simple way of iterating through an array. I mean, we can do it in other ways, like using a for loop we'll see here in a moment, but it's useful to see how a for each loop can be used in code with an array. Here, if the value is between 11 and 20, what we're going to do here is notice that we create an array called countdown, and we instantiate that array in memory, an instance of that array with this keyword new. And this is really kind of our first look into the truly creating objects in memory. So this object is instantiated. The object is the array called countdown, and it's instantiated with this keyword new. And so what we're going to do is it's going to start out with the value of the input, whatever integer value that the user has input. And so it's just going to write out some information about what the user has entered. But what happens here is we're going to iterate through this. We're going to populate this array. And we're going to then display the values as we populate through this array, through this iterative process here. So we have a for loop, and we initialize a variable here, I, an integer, to 0. And while I, or 0, is less than, say, the user entered 13, it is going to enter into this iterative loop, this for loop, and it's going to populate the array and write that value out. So it will populate the array and display the values out as it's being populated. So this is an automatic iterative process of working with arrays. And so once it does that, if the value is not between 1 and 20, then it's just going to ask the user, hey, please enter a value between 1 and 20. And so let's first see that again. So again, looking at this first example, let's enter in the value 5 and return. So that's our manual population of the array. And so let's do an auto population of the array with the value 19. And now we've automatically populated the array. If we enter a value that's outside of that, it says, hey, please enter it between 1 and 20. If we enter in bad information, then it says, hey, please enter in the integers. And that's where we have our catch block down here that helps us trap errors that may occur in our program when the user executes the program. And that completes a very simple example of a C# console application used and written to demonstrate the use of arrays after getting input from users.